The silence after the click of the phone was the loudest sound I had ever heard, a deafening roar of liberation. For 32 years, I, Sarah, had been the family's designated fixer, the quiet architect of their comfort, the invisible hand patching up every financial leak and emotional fracture. It started subtly, a borrowed 20 here, a ride there, a listening ear for a dramatic monologue. It escalated into co-signing loans, paying utility bills, mediating arguments, and being the emotional punching bag for every perceived slight. My parents, Eleanor and Robert, and my siblings, Michael and Jessica, had perfected the art of extracting from me while simultaneously overlooking me. I was their emergency fund, their therapist, their scapegoat, but never truly their sister or daughter. My childhood wasn't so much a nurturing as a continuous course in survival. Eleanor, my mother, was a master manipulator, her love conditional, her approval a rare currency to be earned only through endless service to her and her perceived needs. She suffered from chronic nervous debility, which conveniently flared up whenever she needed to avoid responsibility or garner attention. Robert, my father, was her passive accomplice, always retreating from conflict, hiding behind a newspaper or the television while the house crumbled around him. His silence was as loud as Eleanor's histrionics. Michael, my younger brother by 3 years, was the golden boy, a perpetual child who, at 29, still expected the world to bend to his whims. He was charming but feckless, moving from one failed business venture to another, each ending in financial ruin that, of course, I was expected to rectify. He was an expert in the art of guilt-tripping, his wide, innocent eyes capable of making me believe that denying him money was akin to depriving him of oxygen. Jessica, my older sister by 3 years, was Michael's opposite in her brand of toxicity. She was the queen of passive aggression, her barbed remarks disguised as concern, her compliments always containing a hidden sting. She reveled in my role as the martyr, because it absolved her of the responsibility of ever having to be one. She never offered help, but was always ready to critique my efforts or fan the flames of family drama. I recall countless instances. When Michael got into debt with his first investment in a dubious startup, I took on a second job to help him pay off some of the loans he'd forgotten to mention to our parents. When Eleanor forgot to pay the mortgage, I secretly transferred funds to prevent late fees that would upset her delicate nerves. When Jessica crashed her car, I dipped into my savings to cover the repairs because she was just so busy and couldn't possibly afford it. I was their invisible safety net, their unspoken obligation. My own life, my ambitions, my relationships always took a back seat. I was smart, quiet, and often overlooked, which made me the perfect candidate for the family's fixer. The culmination arrived at Eleanor's 60th birthday celebration. We gathered at her favorite Italian restaurant, which of course she had chosen and which of course I was paying for. The air was electric with the usual mix of strained cordiality and simmering resentment. Eleanor, dressed in a new outfit I had bought her, beamed, soaking up the compliments and gifts, most of which were purchased with my money or with my assistance. She basked in the attention as if it were her personal Academy Award. Michael, my brother, sat across from me, his eyes scanning the menu he clearly had no intention of paying for. He launched into his usual lament, this time about how his latest brilliant idea, a dating app for cat lovers, had crashed and burned, leaving him with mounting debt and unemployed. He was the perpetual child, a charming rogue who, at 29, still expected the world to bend to his whims, and more specifically, for me to foot the bill. Eleanor, ever the doting mother to her golden boy, clucked sympathetically, occasionally shooting me pointed glances. Robert, my father, sat at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on his plate, a master of passive avoidance. "Honestly, Sarah," Michael declared, pushing a stray sauce smear around his plate with a fork, "you're doing so well with your tech job. It's just a small loan, really. My car got repossessed last week, and I can't exactly get to interviews without wheels, can I?" He looked at me with wide, innocent eyes, as if asking for a stick of gum, not a 5-figure sum. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest, the heat rising in my neck. This wasn't new. There was always a crisis, always a demand. But something snapped. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of it, the casual entitlement after I'd just spent months helping Eleanor refinance her house to avoid foreclosure, a situation caused by Michael's previous investment advice. Maybe it was the way Jessica, my older sister, smirked from across the table, her perfectly manicured hand covering a barely concealed laugh. Jessica, 35, was the queen of passive aggression, always ready with a sarcastic remark disguised as concern. "Oh, Michael," Jessica drawled, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You know Sarah loves being the family martyr. It's her whole identity, isn't it, sweetie? Always swooping in to save the day." The words hung in the air, sharp and precise, designed to cut. Eleanor nodded in agreement, a subtle, almost imperceptible tilt of her head that nonetheless felt like a betrayal. She had always fostered this dynamic, pitting us against each other, positioning herself as the fragile matriarch who needed constant tending, and Michael as the troubled genius who needed endless support. I was just the reliable workhorse. My fork clattered onto my plate. The noise was surprisingly loud in the sudden quiet. I looked at each of them. Michael, expectant. Eleanor, feigning innocence. Jessica, triumphant. Robert, absent. "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a knife. "No, Michael, I won't be giving you any money for a car, or anything else." Michael's jaw dropped. Eleanor gasped, a dramatic hand flying to her chest. Jessica's smirk faltered, replaced by genuine shock. Robert finally looked up, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What did you say, Sarah?" Eleanor demanded, her voice rising. "Are you feeling all right, dear?" "It's my birthday." "I said no," I repeated, louder this time, my voice trembling but firm. "I'm done. I'm done being everyone's ATM, everyone's therapist, everyone's scapegoat. I'm done." I stood up, pushing my chair back with a scrape that echoed in the stunned silence. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs, but a strange calm was settling over me. It was the calm of absolute exhaustion, of a spirit finally breaking free from its self-imposed cage. "Enjoy your dinner," I said, my gaze sweeping over their bewildered faces one last time. Then I turned and walked out, leaving behind the half-eaten food, the shattered illusion of family harmony, and 32 years of quiet servitude. The first few days were a blur of adrenaline and a terrifying sense of freedom. I didn't answer their calls. My phone buzzed incessantly with texts from Michael, increasingly frantic and accusatory. Eleanor left a series of increasingly histrionic voicemails, ranging from feigned concern, "Are you sick, darling? Why aren't you answering?" to thinly veiled threats. "Your father is very upset, Sarah. This isn't like you." Jessica sent a single passive-aggressive text. "So mature, Sarah. Real grown-up move." I blocked Michael's number first. It felt like severing a parasitic twin. Then Eleanor's. The relief was immediate, a lightness I hadn't realized I was missing. Jessica's texts were easier to ignore. Her barbs had lost their sting now that I wasn't trying to earn her approval. My revenge wasn't about inflicting pain. It was about reclaiming my own life. It was quiet, methodical, and utterly devoid of drama. I started with the financial ties. Michael's rent, which I'd been secretly subsidizing for the past year, was the first to go. I simply didn't transfer the money on the first of the month. I changed the passwords to my streaming services, Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, which they had all been using for years without contributing a dime. It felt petty, but it was a tangible boundary. I canceled the shared family phone plan that I paid for, giving them a week's notice to set up their own. Each action was a small, deliberate cut, not to them, but to the invisible cords that bound me to their dysfunction. There was no yelling, no grand pronouncements, just quiet, powerful action. I stopped responding to Eleanor's daily check-in calls, which were always thinly veiled attempts to extract emotional labor or gossip. I declined invitations to family dinners, citing work or prior engagements that didn't exist. I learned to say no without explanation, without apology. The escalation was swift and predictable. Michael, suddenly facing the reality of his own financial incompetence, went into a tailspin. He called me from burner phones, left furious messages on my work voicemail, accusing me of ruining his life and being heartless. He started posting vague, dramatic laments on social media about family betrayal and unforeseen hardships, clearly aimed at me. Eleanor, deprived of her primary emotional and financial supply, became a whirlwind of passive-aggressive manipulation. She called my few remaining relatives, spreading stories about my selfishness and how I had abandoned them in their time of need. She even showed up at my apartment building unannounced one evening, feigning concern and trying to guilt-trip me into letting her in. I spoke to her through the intercom, politely but firmly telling her I was busy and couldn't talk. Her wails of "my own daughter" echoed through the lobby. Jessica, ever the subtle saboteur, didn't confront me directly. Instead, she amplified Eleanor's narrative, sharing sympathetic comments on Michael's social media posts and making veiled remarks about people who forget where they came from in family group chats I had muted. She even tried to subtly undermine my professional reputation by casually mentioning my recent stress to a mutual acquaintance who worked in my industry. Robert, as always, was caught in the middle, trying to mediate with a whimper, not a bang. He'd call me, his voice heavy with a manufactured disappointment. "Sarah, your mother is very upset. Michael is really struggling. Can't you just talk to them?" He never once asked how I was or acknowledged the years of emotional and financial burden I had carried. His concern was always for their comfort, never my well-being. The guilt, a familiar phantom limb, ached within me. Had I gone too far? Was I truly a terrible person? This was where Chloe came in. Chloe, my best friend since college, was my anchor, my unwavering support. She had witnessed years of my family's emotional vampirism, had listened patiently to countless stories of their demands and my quiet resentment. When I finally walked out of that birthday dinner, she was the first person I called. "It's about damn time, Sarah," she'd said, her voice firm but kind. "You deserve to live your own life. They're adults. They need to figure it out." Chloe didn't sugarcoat it. She validated my anger, my exhaustion, and my need for distance. She reminded me of all the times they had taken advantage, all the sacrifices I had made that went unappreciated. She helped me navigate the guilt, reminding me that self-preservation wasn't selfishness. "They're reacting because their source of supply is gone," she explained over coffee one afternoon, watching me pick at a scone. "It's not about you being bad. It's about them losing control. You're finally taking your power back." Her words were a balm, a steady hand guiding me through the emotional tempest. We talked for hours, brainstorming strategies for handling their inevitable backlash, practicing firm but polite responses, and reinforcing the idea that my peace was paramount. She encouraged me to find a therapist, and I did. Dr. Evelyn Reed was a quiet, insightful woman who helped me untangle decades of ingrained family patterns to see clearly how I had been conditioned to be the fixer and how my family had exploited that role. Therapy became my sanctuary. Each week I delved into my memories, unearthing long-buried resentments, fears, and frustrations. Dr. Reed helped me understand the cycles of codependency, narcissism, and passive aggression that thrived in my family. She taught me that I was not responsible for anyone else's happiness and that my worth was not determined by how useful I was to others. "Sarah," she would say, "you cannot pour from an empty cup. You must fill your own first." Those words became my mantra. The more I pulled away, the more intense the family's reactions became. Michael, facing eviction from the apartment I was no longer subsidizing, began calling my colleagues, attempting to discredit me, claiming I was unstable and unreliable. Thankfully, my professional reputation was solid, and his attempts backfired. Eleanor escalated from dramatic phone calls to public scenes. One day, she appeared at my office, weeping and pleading for me to come back to the family, drawing the attention of my coworkers. I had to call security. It was humiliating, but also another stark confirmation of how far they would stoop to regain control. Jessica, seeing that direct attacks weren't working, tried to use third parties. She began actively engaging with my Aunt Margaret, an elderly but influential relative who had always sided with Eleanor. Aunt Margaret would call me, attempting to guilt-trip me, talking about family bonds and how Eleanor was suffering. I politely but firmly told her that it was a private matter and I wouldn't discuss it with her. It was hard because I had always respected Aunt Margaret, but I knew I had to remain steadfast. Even Robert, my usually passive father, made more active attempts. He sent me a long, handwritten letter, full of accusations and manipulations, claiming I had broken my mother's heart and destroyed the family. He even threatened that he would never speak to me again if I didn't come to my senses. It hurt because despite his flaws, he was my father. But I knew it was just another attempt to reel me back into old patterns. I didn't respond to the letter. The months that followed were a strange blend of profound relief and agonizing guilt. There were days I missed the familiar chaos, the perverse comfort of being needed, even if it was a need born of their dysfunction. There were moments when Eleanor's tearful voicemails almost broke through my resolve, when Michael's desperate pleas made me waver. But then I would remember Jessica's smirk, Eleanor's subtle nod, Robert's absent gaze, and the memory of that birthday dinner would harden my resolve. I started to rediscover myself. Without the constant drain of their demands, I had more energy, more time. I started taking painting classes, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the bandwidth for. My apartment, once just a place to sleep between family crises, became a sanctuary, filled with books, art, and the quiet hum of my own thoughts. My career, which had always taken a back seat to family emergencies, began to flourish. I took on more challenging projects, spoke up more in meetings, and found a new confidence in my abilities. I began to build new, healthy relationships. I spent more time with Chloe, and our friendship deepened even further. I met new people in my painting classes and through my book club. I even started dating someone, David, who was kind, understanding, and respected my boundaries. He didn't try to fix me or my family, he just listened and supported. It was so unfamiliar, but so healing. The family remained dysfunctional. I heard snippets through rare mutual acquaintances. Michael had moved back in with Eleanor and Robert, his financial woes deepening. Eleanor was still complaining about my betrayal to anyone who would listen. Jessica continued her passive-aggressive social media posts, though I rarely saw them now. They hadn't changed, and they likely never would. They were still trapped in their roles, their patterns. But I was free. The guilt eventually faded, replaced by a quiet, profound sense of peace. I understood now that stepping away wasn't a punishment for them, but an act of survival for me. It wasn't about revenge. It was about self-preservation. I had spent so long trying to fix them, to earn their love and approval, that I had lost myself in the process. By setting boundaries, by cutting the cords, I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply stopped destroying myself. My life wasn't perfect. There were still moments of sadness, a lingering ache for the family I wished I had, but the constant tension, the draining demands, the emotional manipulation, that was gone. I could breathe. I could think. I could simply be. The silence after the click of the phone, that day at the birthday dinner, had been the sound of liberation. And in that silence, I finally found my own voice, clear and strong, for the very first time.